Every storm reveals who was built on stone and who built on sand. The moment has come where false pillars collapse under their own weight, and the ones who hid behind illusion scatter in panic. The air is shifting, the veil is tearing, and you are standing in the very center of a battlefield where truth is finally demanding to be seen. Someone close believed they could weave shadows into reality and bind you with threads you didn't even notice. What they underestimated was the fire inside you, a force they could never tame. Their performance is unraveling, their hidden agenda exposed, and the universe has decided their season of deception is over. You were not simply caught in their web, you were the very reason it was spun. They poured energy into a campaign against you because your light unsettled the darkness they carried. The goal was never just to deceive you, it was to fracture your purpose, to bend your spirit until you no longer trusted your own strength. Masters of subtle sabotage understand that the easiest way to silence a strong soul is to trick it into doubting itself. That's the scheme that was laid before you, planting seeds of confusion, hoping you'd be the one to cut yourself down. They weren't just trying to attack you, they wanted you to willingly step out of your own destiny. But here's where their design collapses. They forgot that pressure doesn't break you, it sharpens you. What they built as a trap has turned into a mirror, showing you exactly how resilient and untouchable your spirit truly is. Their calculations missed one crucial detail: you are not a pawn, you are the rising tide. This collapse is not your downfall, it's your awakening. What was meant to poison you has become the medicine that strengthens your vision. Their exposure is not just their defeat, it is your confirmation that you were chosen to carry a purpose too radiant to be extinguished. The curtain is dropping, the masquerade is over, and now you rise, not as a survivor of betrayal, but as the living proof that no scheme can overpower divine assignment. What once tried to break you has only certified that you were never meant to be broken. You are the kind of soul whose silence carries more weight than another's loudest voice. That's why the ones who thought they could script your downfall are now unraveling at the seams, scrambling to plug holes in a sinking vessel. They clutch at people, pleading for loyalty they never earned, offering hollow promises while fear drips from every word. Their illusions are collapsing, and the person they once believed they could bend has become the very quake tearing through their fragile empire. You're not here by chance. Feel the pull? Tap join to unlock truth, purpose, and a tribe that gets it. This is more than a membership, it's your calling. In their panic, they reach for secrecy like a drowning hand reaching for smoke. The games they once played in the shadows are no longer hidden, and the audience they thought would remain captive has slipped free. Their reality is not dissolving slowly, it is vanishing in front of them, and the irony is sharp. The one they underestimated is now the force they never prepared to face. The tables have turned in ways they could never script. The architect of manipulation, who painted themselves as the victim of your choices, is about to stand face to face with the weight of consequences they cannot rewrite. What they twisted into chains for you are snapping back, binding them instead. And this moment isn't simply about them being unmasked. It's about you seizing a power that was always yours but buried under layers of distortion. For too long, you extended patience that others could not have mustered. You absorbed blows, offered chances, and carried understanding into spaces that did not deserve it. They mistook that for fragility, as though compassion were a flaw instead of a fortress. They believed your endurance was naivety, when in reality, it was evidence of a spirit rooted in strength deeper than their manipulation could ever reach. Your willingness to forgive became their blueprint. Every moment you chose kindness over retaliation was filed away in their calculations, used as ammunition to test how far they could stretch the boundaries. They thought they were studying you like a puzzle to solve, but what they failed to realize was that you were not a puzzle, you were a universe expanding beyond their comprehension. Their attempts to exploit your light were never a sign of your weakness but a declaration of how much they feared what you carry. Mercy was their opening, but it was also the proof of your higher ground. The balance is shifting now, and where they once took notes on your reactions, they are now overwhelmed by their own unraveling. This unraveling marks more than their downfall, it marks your ascension. The very qualities they abused are becoming the forces that elevate you into a realm they cannot touch. Their desperation is no longer your burden, it is their mirror. And as they drown in the weight of what they created, you rise lighter, clearer, and more powerful than ever before. Every time you responded with patience instead of anger, they logged it as proof that you could be molded. Every moment you chose stillness instead of conflict, they treated it like a signal that their influence over you was endless. What they didn't anticipate was that discernment matures, and a soul that awakens no longer tolerates the games that once went unnoticed. The awareness that has risen within you is pulling back every curtain they tried to hide behind. The very insight that allowed you to recognize beauty inside brokenness is the same insight that revealed who was truly disguising their intentions. The same inner wisdom that made you compassionate toward pain eventually showed you the difference between wounds seeking healing and disguises crafted for control. What once seemed like a private conflict was, in reality, a scripted collaboration of multiple players, each executing their assigned part in a performance built to wear you down. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $50 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. While you were extending unconditional grace, they were constructing a network around you. Strangers who seemed coincidentally curious, relatives who asked questions that dug too deep, and acquaintances who appeared at the most unlikely times were not accidents. They were handpicked and positioned, each serving a role in a design intended to track your movements, influence your choices, and corner your spirit. Every conversation that felt casual was actually a probe. Every chance encounter was deliberately placed. They built an invisible structure around you, mistaking your generosity for ignorance, your mercy for lack of strength, and your intuition for blind trust. They couldn't fathom that while they orchestrated their schemes on a small scale, you were aligned with a strategy rooted in a dimension far greater than their vision could reach. Their plan was not only about creating false stories, it went further, attempting to cut you off from the very people who could recognize their masks. They spread subtle doubts, stirred tension in connections that once gave you strength, and slowly worked to place themselves as the sole voice you could depend on. It was a slow erosion meant to leave you isolated and vulnerable, fully tethered to their distorted reality. But what unfolded extended beyond human scheming. There were darker influences woven through their actions, energies designed to distort your thoughts, tether your emotions, and cloud your clarity. The sudden cravings to return to someone you knew was destructive, the lingering heaviness after what appeared to be peaceful interactions, the magnetic pull that defied logic, these were not coincidences. They were engineered disturbances working on levels most people never see. The conflict within you was never a weakness of your own spirit, it was the result of deliberate interference. Emotions were tampered with, connections forged through false energetic cords meant to mimic authenticity but draining your vitality instead. That's why leaving them felt like breaking gravity itself. The struggle was not between your heart and mind, it was a war between what was artificially imposed and what your soul already knew to be true. The depth of your openness became the very thing they tried to weaponize. Every time you confided, it became raw material for their schemes. Every sacred truth you shared turned into a tool in their arsenal. Every piece of guidance you gave was taken, repackaged, and used as a mask to deceive others. They weren't just mishandling your trust, they were attempting to strip the very essence of your spirit to fuel their own distorted agenda. Their sharpest tactic wasn't the lies they told, but how they twisted your own virtues into shackles. They knew your heart leaned toward restoration, so they posed as someone worthy of rescuing. They recognized your devotion to loyalty, so they made guilt the leash that bound you. They understood your vision for potential, so they lured you with endless promises of transformation that never came to life. Every value you carried became an entry point for their manipulation. Behind the curtain, it wasn't random. Different individuals were delegated specific tasks, each piece of the machine playing its part. Some focused on keeping your emotions hooked, balancing praise with neglect to destabilize you. Others created turbulence in your world, stirring distractions to exhaust your focus. And some took to crafting distorted stories about your character, painting false images that traveled faster than your truth. The layer that cut the deepest was the one aimed at your stability. There were attempts to quietly erode your financial footing, to interfere with opportunities, or to subtly poison your professional credibility. Whispered distortions were strategically mixed with fragments of truth, calculated to appear believable while draining the foundation you had worked to build. The ultimate goal was dependency, ensuring that leaving their sphere of influence felt like an impossible risk. They struck at moments when the ground beneath you was shifting. Transitional seasons, breakthroughs in growth, or times when your influence began to expand became their chosen windows to attack. They relied on the fact that those evolving are more susceptible to doubt. They wanted you to question your progress, mistake clarity for confusion, and misinterpret your own growth as instability. But arrogance is always their downfall. The mask they had carefully constructed began to slip, revealing cracks they couldn't control. Convinced that they had conditioned you to ignore your own instincts, they stopped hiding the contradictions. Their overconfidence exposed their patterns more clearly than they realized, and the very deception they relied on became their undoing. That's when your inner vision sharpened. Threads that once seemed scattered connected in undeniable ways. Behaviors you once excused became obvious strategies. The fog they tried to surround you with evaporated, leaving clarity sharper than ever. You began to see how every disruption in your peace carried their fingerprints. And when the realization struck, it came with the force of sudden revelation, the awareness that you had never been powerless, only temporarily blinded. The heart that trusts deeply often becomes the richest source of information for those who lack integrity. Every secret shared in confidence was quietly transferred, every fragile moment became material for future strikes, every detail of your story was dissected and stored like tools in a hidden arsenal. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a calculated theft of your essence, a way to hold your truth hostage and twist it into chains meant to keep you tied to their distorted narrative. The greatest shock came not from what they took but from how they twisted your highest qualities into weapons against you. The very vision that allowed you to recognize possibility in others was manipulated to blind you to their patterns. The compassion that made you a safe place was repurposed into a cage, keeping you excusing what should never have been excused. The calling to mend what is broken was distorted into a trap, binding you to someone who shattered themselves intentionally to manipulate your mercy. This wasn't random, it was precision work. They tracked the rhythm of your emotions, studied when your defenses were low, and charted which emotional strings would elicit the reaction they wanted. They became fluent in your hesitations, experts at planting doubt, masters of scripting scenarios that would leave you questioning yourself while they pulled the levers unseen. Each move was rehearsed, each word chosen with the intent of drawing you deeper into their maze. Eventually the economic threads came into focus, and the sabotage revealed itself like ink under fire. What looked like coincidence, lost chances, sudden blocks, resources slipping away, began to reveal a pattern that all traced back to their interference. They had been subtly tampering with the ground beneath you, dismantling opportunities, scattering doubt in professional spaces, and weaving invisible cords of financial dependence designed to weaken your freedom and tether your choices. But where they thought they were dismantling you, they only awakened something they were never prepared to face. Instead of leaving you hollow, the unveiling of their plot sparked the rise of a force within you, an unshakable warrior spirit that burned away illusion and refused to be tricked by performances. That awakening was the turning point, the moment when your patience turned to clarity and your compassion transformed into unyielding strength. From that point forward, your focus shifted. No longer entangled in the cycle of fixing and forgiving, your energy became devoted to freedom, sovereignty, and shielding the light they had once siphoned. What they mistook for endless access suddenly became a closed door. What once fed them now rejected them entirely, and the flow of energy reversed. What they had drained was now fortified and impenetrable. With your light no longer reflecting back to disguise their emptiness, they stood exposed in the raw truth of their own shadows. Without your energy to polish their mask, the image they had so carefully crafted dissolved. And what everyone began to see was what had always been there: desperation without depth, manipulation without power, and a spirit unable to sustain itself without the brilliance it tried so desperately to steal. The moment came when their strategies began collapsing in their own hands. Attempts to replicate the same manipulations with new people fell flat instantly. Those they sought to ensnare weren't tuned to the vibration you carry. They weren't prepared to overlook lies for potential, nor willing to bend endlessly in the name of compassion. What had once worked flawlessly against you met walls of resistance that stopped their tactics before they could take root. Instead of finding another person who would nurture their illusions, they collided with individuals who possessed clear boundaries and no tolerance for deceit. These people didn't feel guilty for refusing unreasonable demands, didn't excuse disrespect, and didn't linger around toxicity hoping it might change. They left without hesitation, denying the manipulator the drama and attention they craved. The stories that once drew sympathy now earned rolled eyes and closed doors. Without your presence to polish their image, their mask began disintegrating. They had borrowed your energy to appear wiser, kinder, more balanced than they truly were. Stripped of that borrowed light, they looked exactly as they were: chaotic, inconsistent, and unconvincing. People could suddenly see the stark difference between what they projected and what they lived, and the illusion could no longer survive in the open air. Family patterns they had long kept under wraps started surfacing in ways impossible to disguise. Habits that had once been excused as quirks became glaring red flags. Generational cycles they had refused to address came crashing into plain sight, unfolding in public rather than hidden in private corners. The narrative they had spent years crafting was unraveling, not because you said a word, but because truth had a way of revealing itself without permission. The network that had been used to monitor, report, and control you suddenly had no fuel. With your silence, there was nothing left to deliver, no reaction to pass along, no drama to feed on. Those who once felt powerful carrying fragments of your life realized their efforts meant nothing. Their carefully built structure fell apart when you refused to participate, leaving them chasing shadows where your presence had once been. The collapse reached its peak when the manipulator discovered the most devastating truth of all: power evaporates when the target stops desiring it. Their influence relied entirely on you needing validation, reassurance, or acceptance from them. The instant you no longer wanted anything they could offer, their arsenal turned into dead weight. They were leaders of a battle no one was still fighting, generals without an army, voices without an audience. Then came the breaking wave of exposure. From within their own circle, someone finally decided silence was too heavy to carry. Secrets spilled outward, not as whispers but as undeniable revelations. Their allies turned into questioners, conversations shifted into confessions, and the same schemes that once bound others began to dismantle their empire. Those who had once aided them felt the sting of betrayal themselves and saw with clarity the very face they had worked so hard to hide. What shattered everything wasn't just the exposure of their falsehoods, but the undeniable recognition of how calculated their schemes had been. People began connecting dots, realizing that private exchanges had been twisted into public manipulation, and that words they spoke under trust had been re-engineered to serve someone else's strategy. What once seemed like isolated betrayals unfolded as a vast machinery of control, each piece revealing the scope of their hidden agenda. Soon, the weight of their actions pushed beyond whispers and into tangible repercussions. Patterns of sabotage that left financial scars came with receipts. Reputation smears that once floated as rumor now appeared as deliberate, traceable assaults. Even practices designed to manipulate energy and consciousness, though rarely acknowledged in conventional frameworks, stood as spiritual violations carrying consequences beyond earthly law. What humanity's courts might not yet have language for, higher law was already addressing. Proof surfaced not through speculation but through documentation. Screens illuminated with messages where strategies were mapped out. Logs of transactions and deals showed where opportunities had been rerouted for their gain. Records of coordinated attacks on your essence emerged in plain sight. Their empire of secrecy unraveled not because you forced it, but because the evidence they thought would stay buried began rising in waves too strong to suppress. Their arrogance sealed their downfall. The very need to brag about control, to show off their supposed power, became the rope that bound them. Chats, recordings, and boasts they shared in their own circles became the undeniable testimony of their schemes. The pride they wore as a mask transformed into the proof that stripped them bare. As the magnitude expanded, others stepped forward with similar stories. It became impossible to write it off as a single conflict. This was a pattern, a blueprint they had applied in multiple places, leaving trails of fractured lives and stolen energy across communities. Spiritual practitioners recognized the imprint of what had been unleashed, tracing it back to its source with clarity that left no room for denial. The spiritual undercurrent that powered their manipulations could no longer be hidden. What had masqueraded as mere disagreements revealed itself as a coordinated effort to siphon strength, corrupt purpose, and twist gifts against their rightful owners. Every maneuver, every tactic, every perfectly timed disruption revealed itself as part of something far darker than ordinary deception, an intentional effort to enslave light with shadow. And then the walls began collapsing from within. Their fabricated identity, the one they had performed for years, couldn't withstand the blaze of truth. Desperation turned to bargaining, bribes, and pleas, but the spell had broken. They promised correction, repayment, silence, but no one was listening anymore. For the first time, the momentum of truth moved without resistance, propelled not by revenge but by the simple fact that lies cannot stand when the energy that sustained them is gone. Their collapse became the backdrop for your unfolding. As they scrambled to preserve illusions that were disintegrating in every direction, your path widened into spaces they had tried to block. Where they strained to hold onto fractured alliances, you attracted authentic bonds rooted in truth. Their struggle to maintain appearances only highlighted the brilliance of your integrity. The one who had tried to convince you of your insignificance was suddenly face to face with their own emptiness, isolated not by your hand but by the consequences of their choices. What defined your victory wasn't cruelty or revenge, but restraint. You didn't need to mock their downfall or celebrate their unraveling. You simply embodied the same essence they had tried to erase: steadiness, composure, and strength that radiated without force. You proved that true power has no need for vengeance, because it is sustained by alignment rather than retaliation. The clarity you gained became your greatest wealth. Energy once wasted on deciphering contradictions flowed back into your purpose. The mental space once consumed by chaos opened into creation. The gifts they had tried to distort emerged purified, sharper, and stronger, refined by the fire of opposition. What had been tampered with became untouchable. What had been attacked became indestructible. Your vision became precise, able to recognize manipulation before it had a chance to settle. Your boundaries solidified into fortresses that protected your peace without apology. Your intuition, once doubted under their influence, evolved into a guiding force so exact that no tactic of deception could bypass it. The very faculties they tried to weaken became the instruments of your mastery. Even those who once stood against you began to shift. Some reached out with genuine remorse, finally recognizing the weight of what they had been a part of. Others sought favor, realizing too late where true strength resided. Your responses to each one reflected the wisdom gained: discernment over blind forgiveness, clarity over pity, sovereignty over codependence. You recognized that the ordeal hadn't been a diversion, it had been an initiation. The pain you endured sharpened your understanding of how spiritual interference disguises itself in human behavior. The trials you survived gave you language to help others navigate similar storms. The solitude you experienced forged a deeper communion with your source, one that comfort could never have offered. What emerged from the ashes was a version of you they could never defeat. Compassion no longer equated to fragility, it had become armored with wisdom. Flexibility transformed into adaptability that served your destiny, not your destruction. The light they tried to smother proved untouchable, for it flows from a realm beyond their reach. Their descent only highlighted the altitude at which you naturally exist. Your life now stands as undeniable evidence that divine alignment cannot be permanently interrupted by schemes rooted in ego or fear. No matter how elaborate the plan, no matter how many hands tried to hold you back, the connection to Source within you remained untouched. It became clear that darkness can only win when light agrees to dim itself, and you finally stopped apologizing for being radiant. What their downfall truly revealed was never about them, it was about you. For years they tried to convince you that your passion was too heavy, your awareness too sharp, your presence too overwhelming. The truth is that you were never too much. You were the exact measure required for those worthy of your energy, and far beyond the capacity of anyone who only sought to consume it. Their frantic attempts to hold back exposure only sped up their unraveling. Truth carries a current of its own, moving with momentum that no human hand can contain. Every falsehood they spoke about you became a mirror reflecting their own nature. Every manipulation they crafted turned into a snare that caught them instead. Even those who once stood by them began seeing clearly, questioning why they ever believed the narrative in the first place. This isn't just a story of triumph, it is the genesis of a new chapter. What you endured taught you that your abilities are not ornaments to be displayed but treasures to be safeguarded. Your energy is not an endless fountain for others to drain but a resource that must be directed with intention. The very attacks meant to strip you of your strength revealed how extraordinary and essential your gifts truly are. The deeper realization is that your purpose is not simply to offer service but to execute a mission with full authority. Where they tried to fracture you, you became indivisible. Where they tried to hide your brilliance, it grew impossible to ignore. Where they tried to take your essence, the trials only multiplied it. The power they once sought to steal now overflows beyond their reach.